It's Sunday, August 13, 2024. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. I'm thrilled to welcome a brand new guest, a Midas Touch colleague and renowned Gen Z pro-democracy influencer and YouTuber, Adam Mockler. Welcome to the Weekend Show.
Thank you for having me, Anthony.
I'm a huge fan of yours, Adam. I think we should probably start there. It's important that you know that you have support from a large kind of pro-democracy audience. But often is the case with both of our work that people say that we're often talking into a vacuum because we don't need to convince people that are already pro-democracy minded to not vote for Donald Trump and the threat of authoritarianism. How do we reach the people that are traditionally conservatives or Trump supporters and make them see the light? You do a very good job of this because you actually go out to Trump rallies, you talk to people face to face. How difficult is it, just, as a place to start, to actually get through? Because obviously it makes great television, but how do you think you're kind of making those connections? Have you managed to convince anyone?
Yeah, it's a spectrum for sure. Let's call it the brain rot spectrum. All Trump supporters are somewhere on this spectrum, right? And there's clips of me talking to people that are low on the spectrum where if I reason them over to a more centrist position, it clicks in their brain and they understand. For example, I say this all the time, but there's a viral clip of a Trump supporter saying, we need to stop funding Ukraine. We need to put America first. And I say, hey man, funding Ukraine is exactly how we put America first because it boosts our economy and it protects an ally abroad, stops Russia. And by the end of the 2-minute clip, he goes, you know what? I never looked at it that way. And his brain flipped. And you could tell that this is a good man who just didn't have access to this information via Fox News or whatever, Newsmax or whatever he's watching. On the other end of the spectrum, and one of my recent videos demonstrates this very well, some people would rather vote for Vladimir Putin over Kamala Harris. I mean, I have a video that I just released where almost every Trump supporter in the video says they'd vote for Putin over Harris. And I'd say that person is deep on the brain rot scale. They're consuming too much Twitter or X, like too much of Elon Musk's feed. And I think those people generally still are good people. But yeah, that takes a different sort of deprogramming or rewiring. And I do want to say there's a common misconception. A lot of these Trump supporters are really nice people who are just misled. A few weeks ago, I was at a Trump rally, or this might have been like right as it was stopping being cold outside. I was freezing and like, what was this? April maybe. It had to have been March or April. So it was a few months back. I was freezing on the field and a Trump supporter takes his gloves off of his hands and gives me his gloves and says, I'll go buy some more. So he's a nice dude, but then we talk to him and he thinks that all Democrats are communists. So that just is a prime example of how a nice guy can be brain rotted. Yeah.
I work on the assumption that we're all the same. And I think that's a really important place to start, is that, when we are birthed, we all come out in a kind of neutral position. Nobody is politically stacked, but there is this issue of hereditary voting where young people just do what their parents did, as I did. My parents were conservatives, and so I just assumed that was the right thing to do. And I remember being told very early on, the conservatives, they're much better with business and with money, and you want them running the country. So I voted conservative. And I think that is something here. Obviously, conservative where I'm from is centrist pretty much, even a little to the left by American standards. But here it is so tribal. It's become so completely different. And you've grown up at a very interesting time in American political history. You've literally been dropped right in the middle of this rise of fascism and things that your parents probably never thought would ever happen in America. And yet here we are staving off a threat that is as bad as Hitler in the kind of late 20s, early 30s. Do people really, in your experience, understand that the threat is that serious?
I think that people my age probably are already inclined to distrust the same institutions that Trump undermines. So what I'm saying is younger generations tend to be more anti-establishment. You can look at the protests throughout the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. But that being said, a lot of my friends don't like the way that Trump goes about trying to dismantle our institutions. So I have a lot of friends in high school, let's say like my frat bros, they're now in frats. They'll say, I kind of like Trump. He's macho. And like, what has the government done for me? Why do I care if he goes there and dismantles it? And usually you can reason them into a position where it's like, hey, they believe in climate change. They believe in marriage equality. They believe in all these liberal positions. And you can explain that those very institutions will allow us to pass climate change legislation someday. So I think most young people, if you look at the poll, 70% of young people do understand that Trump is a threat to our institutions, do understand that he will inhibit our ability to pass any climate change legislation. But that being said, a lot of young people do tend to be anti-establishment. I mean, I've talked to people both on the right and on the far, far left that subscribe to this like accelerationist point of view. There are people on the far left that say, hey, if we just get Trump in, he'll quickly tear down our institutions and then we can rebuild them. That doesn't make any more sense than a far right person wanting Trump to come in and tear down our institutions. So yeah, I think that to answer your question broadly, progress does need to be made with my generation so they understand why liberalism is good, why the institutions that held on January 6th probably are here for the better, right?
You make a really interesting point, and that is that none of these institutions are perfect. Mm-hmm. And so there is an argument to tear them down.
Yeah.
It's not the Democrat position, though. The Democrat position is keep calm and carry on, business as usual. Is that a problem, though? Because obviously we wouldn't go to the extremes of Donald Trump, shutting down the Department of Education, the FBI, the judiciary. But reform is essential. And even Kamala Harris is not really making a case for that, is she?
No, I mean, there is reform to be made throughout our institutions. I think Bernie Sanders makes a decent case for it, but I think President Biden approached it in a pretty solid way. He's really good at reaching across the aisle due to his experience in Washington and passing actual legislation that was massive. I mean, some of these bills are billions, trillions of dollars. They span out a decade into the future and will fix America in many, many ways. And people just want results now. They want results now. It's not sexy to say, hey, in 2032, carbon emissions will be down here. People my age are pretty impatient. They want it to be done right now. So I do think that Kamala Harris could make the case, but she is relatively progressive. I mean, I think she is doing what needs to be done to appeal to the demographics she needs to appeal to. And I have a feeling that when she gets into office, she'll have pressure from different wings to be more progressive. But right now, I think that appealing to the Liz Cheney faction is necessary to save our democracy,
It's almost like there is a short-term disaster that needs to be avoided. And that is Trumpism.
Yep.
I.e. fascism, i.e. authoritarianism. That's like the short-term emergency. And so arguably, if people are voting for Kamala Harris, they're mainly voting for her because she is not Donald Trump. Get that done first and then worry about the policies later, maybe.
But I will say some of these super progressive policies, and I consider myself a progressive personally, but for example, some of Bernie Sanders' policies, and this might make some people mad, but some people will know where I'm coming from, they're just not efficient in a way that they should be. For example, he has a proposal to wipe out everybody's student loans, everybody's debt. I think that is a regressive policy because if you think about it, how many doctors, how many lawyers end up being the highest earners of society? Why do they need subsidies from the government, or why do they need their loans wiped? I think we should means test it like Biden did so that teachers or people who are struggling or people who didn't finish college, they get their student debt wiped. And then we fix it from the ground problem, or from the ground floor, maybe we fix the problem there. We make sure that schools aren't so expensive, that the loans aren't so predatory. But my broader point is, I think that some of these super reformist, let's push the envelope, even when Bernie Sanders is doing it, who I agree with, it's just regressive. I know that lawyers and doctors who are super rich, they don't need a handout from the government. You know what I mean?
But I suppose, and just to play devil's advocate with this, a lot of those loans are now in the hands of unscrupulous kind of debt collection companies who have charged so much interest that actually to wipe the loan would be very helpful because it's not actually the loan at all. It's just profit.
That is true, but wouldn't you rather use the political capital to cut off the problem from the root where those predatory loans are coming in rather than putting a Band-Aid on a boat and then 10 years later another generation expects, where's our $3 trillion? At that point it'd be where's our $5 trillion of debt relief?
Well,
and
maybe you can
I get
do
where you're
both.
coming from too. What's up?
Maybe you can do both. I mean, maybe it doesn't have to be either or. And this is a big problem with American politics, is that it is this kind of either or sorry, it's kind of opposites, isn't it? It's like, okay, it's either that or it's that, but it can't be both. And I try to make the point as often as possible that two things can coexist, and that it is possible to do that and that. And, you know, it's not like you don't give up capitalism for a few more social programs. Capitalism is here to stay, right?
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. I'm always saying that the Nordic model is perfect. In a perfect world, America could be like that. And the thing is, like, the thing that bothers me is Trump supporters will agree with that if you word it in the right way. So if you say the word like social safety net or welfare state, of course their brain shuts down. But if you say, don't you think veterans and homeless people should get some sort of help from the government, as long as it comes from like the richest people, they were like, yeah, that does make sense. Of course, veterans should get help. I talked to a Trump supporter a few months back that said, she has an autistic son who needs therapy, who just needs healthcare. She doesn't have money to pay for healthcare because it's expensive. She didn't realize how expensive therapy was. And I said, don't you think the government should be able to provide like the bare necessity therapy for your autistic son? And she said, of course, that would be so helpful. And I said, well, that's what Democrats want to propose. That's what Democrats are doing. She's like, that sounds like socialism to me. So you just see her brain flip in real time when, you know, she would be okay with those social safety nets otherwise, right?
So this goes back to the earlier point that ultimately we're all the same, and
Yes.
people are good. It's the branding that has confused them. It's the marketing. Trump is he might be the dumbest man on earth, but he's also an expert marketeer, right? And so people have kind of fallen for his charms, but the rest of us, we can read the true language, both verbally and the body language, when we know he's lying, which is most of the time. So, yeah, exactly, with the accordion. So how do we overcome that? Because what's really important to me, and I'm sure it's the same with you when you approach people at rallies, is you just want to help them. You're not there to embarrass them. You're not there to show them up or make yourself look great and them look bad. You're there because you want them to benefit from the policies of the Democrats, and which they are ultimately going to benefit from. If they vote for Trump, they are not going to see any of the things that he has promised. They didn't last time, and they won't again.
It's really simplistic, but I think a lot of people are on the wrong algorithm right now because honestly, these people are, I talk to Trump supporters and they're smart, right?
Yeah.
But they're only selectively smart. So they know this exact COVID vaccine variant that came out in 2023 and how it links back to a 1987 study about mRNA vaccines. They know like what a meta-analysis is and how to pull this stuff
They can do
out.
the research.
Yeah, but then when I talk about climate change, they're like, I haven't seen any proof of that. They lose all of their literacy skills and ability to do research. And then when we're talking about ivermectin, they all of a sudden know about all these studies again, and then they flips back. So it's interesting because a lot of these people are smart, but it's just they're on some sort of algorithm or they're being tricked in some way. So the solution, I honestly don't know. I wish I had a solid solution, but maybe better media literacy skills from a young age. How do we sift through sources? And a lot of times, people don't even understand the underlying civics at play. So how do we expect them to understand how Trump is breaking these norms? For example, no Trump supporter knows what an elector is in America, right? Yeah. But how are they going to understand the fake elector scheme? They probably don't understand that there's a separate congressional budget that FEMA has for immigration and for natural disasters. But how are they going to know that when they don't understand the purpose of Congress or that the president isn't a king? So if they don't understand the underlying civics, how are they going to understand what we build on top? And hey, Trump is knocking this tower over.
But Trump doesn't understand the underlying civics. Trump didn't know what an elector was, let alone a fake elector, until John Eastman told him. So isn't this the problem, is that it's the blind leading the blind? And you simply mustn't. This is why I suppose that whole thing of Trump being like, I'm not a politician, I've only ever been to Washington 17 times and I never stayed over. Yeah. It's why that is so distracting, because you want somebody who is a politician. You want somebody who like Obama being a community organizer and like working in politics. It's important to know how to communicate, but also to use the political system to help people who are voting for you.
Yeah, that is true. Donald Trump was just like a wrecking ball that basically eroded every norm before he even got into office. I do think a lot of it too is just Russian disinformation. I talk
Yeah.
about this a lot, but we are in an invisible war with Russia right now, and Vladimir Putin understands that what's cheaper than putting troops on the ground over in America or in any other country than Ukraine is to wage this invisible war. And then that leads to me being at a Trump rally the other day, and I asked these Trump supporters, would you rather vote for Kamala Harris or Putin? They all say Putin, and 10 out of 10 of those Trump supporters also said that January 6th was justified, that the election was stolen. So you can see if people are on this Vladimir Putin algorithm, this like they're far on the brain rot spectrum again, then they essentially, then they're less American. I mean, it's just like, it's insane to me that these people wrap themselves in the American flag. I know there's a quote about this, but genuinely, there's a Trump supporter the other day that had American flag face paint and said that Putin is more American than Kamala Harris. So I think that is also a big part of the problem. And that all comes together to create this new movement where 40% of the country thinks that all of our institutions are rigged.
Is it 30 or 40% of the country? I mean, this is the other misnomer, isn't it? That nobody really knows.
Yeah.
We know that 70 million odd people voted for Donald Trump last time around, but we don't know how many of those are actually in the Trump cult and would paint their face and vote for Putin over Harris, versus how many of those maybe just are thinking that they're going to get a better tax break if they vote for Donald Trump. Isn't it interesting? We have all this data, and yet, and look at the polls, we have, they're neck and neck, despite the fact that one is clearly working for the Russians. And so much of the data is so confusing, it really doesn't make any sense. So we might get quite an interesting surprise in 3 weeks' time.
You can I talk about that for a second?
Go ahead.
Man, okay. I hate to be this guy, and I hate to be doomer, and I totally hope I'm wrong for very obvious reasons. But something lately in my instinct has been telling me not only this is going to be closer than most people think, which I hope is not true, but I also think Trump might pull it off. Like, there's actually a 50-60% chance. And most polling models right now back up what I'm saying. Most polls are very close. We're 1 or 2 percentage polling error away from a Trump victory. And I'm pretty sure last election cycle, not to be too doomer, last election cycle, President Biden was up 8 points in Wisconsin heading into election week, and he ended up winning by less than 1 percentage point. There was a massive error in the polling in favor of Donald Trump, and that might not happen again. It might not happen again, of course, but I just want to say I uploaded a video earlier where I tried to talk about this, and people in the comments were shutting down. They were saying, Adam, you're totally wrong. Trump's never going to touch power again. I don't even want to think about this. And that's sort of the type of mindset that allowed 2016 to happen. So I'm just saying, Donald Trump has had 10 years to campaign on the national stage. He's had 9 or 10 years to gain name recognition. If we want to count 2015, 2016, he's been campaigning relentlessly. Kamala Harris has had 105 days to recreate that same name recognition. I talked to this older black woman while I was canvassing in Wisconsin last week. We were door knocking, and she didn't know a single thing about Kamala Harris. And I don't know why, but that kind of worried me, because she was like, she was like, I feel like I should know more about Kamala, but I honestly don't know a thing about her, which makes me realize, like, okay, a lot of people don't know anything about Kamala, and they know a lot about Trump. At the same time, things are objectively more expensive in America. It's not Biden's fault whatsoever, but all of these things are coming together to make me a little bit nervous. I was also at Trump's Butler rally in Pennsylvania a week ago, or it was last Saturday. It
was round, wasn't it? Like 100,000 people.
It was like 1.2 million. No. Could you imagine? That's what Trump thinks. No, but it was I don't even think it was 100,000, but man, it was massive. I can't even put a number on it because Trump lied about it and the media said something different, but it was massive. Yeah. And there were many people there that just were casually there that you wouldn't think. And it's insane.
About 2 or 3 weeks before Biden stepped aside, I put a video out suggesting that maybe Kamala and Joe Biden switch places, and that he became the vice presidential candidate, and I got a lot of flack for that from people.
A lot of hate.
They were like, that is not happening. We love Joe Biden. And then about a week or two later, the announcement that he was stepping aside and she was stepping up. So I was kind of half right in my analysis.
Yep.
But my thinking was that it was necessary to kind of break this cycle because it was problematic having 2 old white men as the candidates. and Donald Trump suddenly became the old white guy at 78. The problem, though, is that Kamala Harris, yes, she's younger, but she's female and she's a person of color. And in this country, that could be problematic.
I didn't even mention that aspect. You get where my worry comes from, though, right? Like, there's definitely a reality where on election night, PA just goes red, and we're all just kind of floored. Like, how did we get here? But there were signs.
Okay, we have to take a break, but I want to come back and talk about this a bit further in just a moment. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. I've always found it difficult to find clothes that I like to wear. And when I find one thing that works, I just buy loads of them and just wear the same thing all the time. Well, men's closets were due for a radical reinvention, and Rhone stepped up to the challenge. Rhone's commuter collection is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible set of products known to man. And here's why. Rhone helps you get ready for any occasion. The commuter collection offers the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, zips, and polos. You'll never have to worry about what to wear when you've got the Rhone commuter collection. The comfortable four-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy what life throws your way, from your commute to work or your 18 holes of golf. It's time to feel confident without the hassle. With Rhone's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the products. It's that easy. And with Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. And on top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can ditch the dry cleaner altogether. I personally love a technical fabric, something that is advanced and uses technology to make a more comfortable and more modern outfit. Now, the commuter collection can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. So head to Rhone.com/Anthony and use promo code Anthony to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to RHONE.com/Anthony and use code Anthony, ANTHONY. It's time to find your corner office comfort. We're back with Adam Mockler on The Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis. So I've started saying a new phrase, Adam, when people say to me, oh, America is not ready to elect a female. And I say, well, they already did elect a female. And people kind of look at me puzzled. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote.
Yep.
So a female was elected. She didn't achieve office because, as we have this archaic system of the Electoral College, which is stacked in favor of Republicans and could be Kamala Harris's downfall this time around. But it suggests to me that America is definitely ready for a female president. How are you feeling that when you're out and about with people?
What you said is very true, not to mention the fact that Kamala Harris was on the ticket with Joe Biden and they got 83 million votes.
That's right.
People damn well knew that Biden was old as hell and that Kamala Harris could become the president someday. Yeah. And also I want to say, could anyone be more qualified than Kamala Harris? Right. Genuinely, she was a district attorney. She was an attorney general. She was a senator. She's shadowed Biden for 4 years while he passed massive amounts of legislation. I don't know if anyone could be more qualified. Hillary Clinton is pretty qualified as well, but she had like a decades-long smear campaign running against her. But I do see that on the field a lot. People say, I don't think a woman is ready to be president. People say it very overtly, that she's too emotional. I also know people that have this weird, deep layer of misogyny. And that's not a word that I like to throw around because I think you lose voters once you start to go, you're misogynistic. But genuinely, I talk to some people and when they say stuff like, quote, I just think her voice is annoying. Just the way she speaks is annoying. I'm like, yeah, that is definitely some deep down misogyny. People don't say that about Obama, for example. And then also there's the racism aspect. We can touch on that later. But I do think a lot of people are a little bit misogynistic or deeply misogynistic. And it's still like, I don't know. I don't care how misogynistic you are. Trump is objectively the whiniest, I don't even know. He's the whiniest person on the planet.
And the most emotional as well. He's an emotional wreck.
Yeah, he's the one that's emotional.
Yeah.
I've never seen Kamala Harris get even close to that amount of emotional or like be baited that easily is what I'm trying to say.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because it's almost like we're living in a parallel universe where everything is upside down. what do they call it in Stranger Things? They call it the upside down, right?
Yeah,
It's like it's just this other world. You cross through whatever the force field, and suddenly you're in this place. And to me, and I'm sure it's the same for you, that Trump world and reality bear no resemblance when it comes not just to voting for a female or a person of color, but even down to understanding things like veganism or homosexuality, like normal things that the rest of the world has been dealing with now for hundreds of years in a very respectful way. And yet here it's still like, oh, what? You're vegan? What are you, gay? I mean, how do we deal with that?
I mean, the annoying part is not even that, like, we live in different realities. It's that they try to mirror reality perfectly, like a mirror. So when we say that Trump is a threat to democracy, because he is, Elon Musk hits back by tweeting, the Democrats are the real threat to democracy. Trump says that as well. They say that we're like stooges for Iran or whatever. Or Kamala Harris is a stooge for, when they're a stooge for, they say that Kamala Harris doesn't understand the English language or whatever. When Trump is the one who can't put a sentence together, they genuinely mirror reality perfectly. There's a few more examples that I can't think of, but the main one is that Trump actually tried to steal the election in 100 different ways with John Eastman on January 6th by making up all these lies. But then they try to say Democrats tried to steal the election in 100 different ways, that Democrats are the threat to democracy. And that, when they say that Democrats amped up the rhetoric in American politics because Kamala Harris called Trump like a loser one time, when Trump's entire entry into American politics was this bombastic, swinging at everyone, making up nicknames, saying that Obama wasn't born in America. So yeah, the broader point is here, I hate how they flip reality on its back. Like you said, the upside down, it just mirrored so perfectly. It's annoying. I don't know how we fix it though.
I mean, there are suggestions on how it can be fixed, and if you talk to the scientists and the doctors about it, and I'm referring to, say, Dr. Stephen Hassan, who wrote The Cult of Trump, who deprograms people, or Dr. Bandy Lee, who we've been having on this show for the last few weeks, she says that when you remove the source, i.e. the gang leader, that the supporters will revert to their pre-gang state or their pre-cult state. Which means that if Trump was eradicated, and let's just say that he passed away from old age, that he wasn't able to be that force anymore, that people then are like, okay, well, that whole thing has stopped. Do you think that could happen? Or do you think that Trumpism has now come so far that it'll just be Matt Gaetz or Don Jr. or somebody that will just run with that and be the new Trump leader?
I think there will still be aspects of it, but it probably won't be as centralized as it is now. There won't be one figure who can just like dictate what the news says that day. Like even when you see them fighting, Marjorie Taylor Greene fighting with Laura Loomer, and then Matt Gaetz starts fighting with McCarthy or whoever. I mean, all the MAGA figures fight amongst themselves, so I'm sure it'll split back up. And also, you see remnants of MAGA before MAGA even happened. I think the Tea Party is the most obvious example, but even before that, if you watch Sacha Baron Cohen and Borat, obviously, he's like talking to the Trump supporters back in 2005, whatever that was. Remember the rodeo scene where the guy says, I wish we could kill gay people here, whatever. That dude's definitely voting Trump if he's still alive, and he's not. I don't even know. But and then even before that, like Rush Limbaugh or Newt Gingrich, there's always this like toxicity in American politics that Republicans have been bringing. Trump just capitalized on that in a very instinctual way by, I don't know, being bombastic as hell. So I do think there will still be segments of MAGA, but I don't think it'll be as pronounced or centralized as it is now.
Because Trump never held these beliefs, some of them, but not all of them. He basically found an audience, didn't he? He realized that it would be easier for him to run as a Republican, despite being a Democrat previously, because the Republicans, or the MAGA Republicans, as he kind of made them, were more gullible, and that he said he could say anything, or he could shoot somebody, and people would just buy into it. I mean, that's his marketing expertise, isn't it? That's his kind of branding, the Trump branding. That's all he's really done. He's just rebranded this kind of toxic, racist, right-wing movement with a kind of licensed Trump brand on it.
Yeah, it's annoying. I mean, we all know. I mean, I'm sure he was like a decently centrist or maybe even liberal guy a few decades back. He donated to Kamala Harris back in 2012. Yeah. That wasn't long ago, right? I mean, this dude was probably, but yeah, he's definitely grifting. I think he's so sucked up into the scheme that he believes it now. And he also is such a good marketer that he doesn't even actually have to have policies. And this is part of the double standard in both sides. So when Donald Trump talks about Ukraine, he always says, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. It never should have happened. When he talks about abortion, he has a new stance every single day. When he's talking about healthcare, he has concepts of a plan. No matter what he's talking about, he doesn't have a real plan. He just coasts by on this vague racism or vaguely saying that Kamala Harris didn't work at McDonald's and she just recently turned black. There's nothing concrete there, only concepts.
So we should probably work on the assumption that most people now who live in reality know that Trump is a grifter and it's a farce, and that he is not the person that he's been telling us that he is. And he's done enough press conferences. I mean, even the economic forum that he presented his economic policy at a few days ago in Detroit was embarrassing. I mean, anybody who sat through the 2-hour speech, I know you did, and I sat with you watching that insanity, especially the Q&A afterwards. It was like he was a mental patient in a hospital, and really someone needed just to come and take him away and say, no, you need to be back in your room. And yet the guy is allowed to run for office. So is it fair to say that the people who won't be voting for him, they all know that now? Like, there's no secret anymore. People like yourself have been blowing the whistle for long enough. But really what's left over is either people who have a vendetta against, I don't know, the deep state or whatever you choose to call the federal government, or they're tax avoiders or evaders, or maybe they're racist and misogynistic, as we said earlier. I mean, who's everybody else that doesn't fall for this act?
You know, I think a lot of them will still just be Republicans who are willing to fall in line. Because if you think about it, if Biden would have stayed in the race, even after that disastrous debate performance, he probably still would have gotten like 50 to 55 million votes in America. And we clearly saw he was not in good shape. It's just people voting for not the other side. So I still think it would probably be a lot of Republicans who are falling in line and who don't quite understand how bad it is. I mean, I ask a lot of my Trump supporter friends if they've seen his childcare response. Remember when he went on a long rant about childcare? Everyone
he didn't know what it was.
Most of them,
right?
Yeah, most of them haven't seen it, though. Most of them haven't seen any of that. And, like, I have to send it to them. I have to send these clips to them and be like, this is the dude you're voting for. And once I send it to them, they're like, yeah, this guy is a dumbass. So I think that a lot of the people are genuinely racist. I mean, there is a lot of Hitlerian rhetoric that goes on when I'm at these rallies. It's insane to talk to these like sweet old moms who say, yes, we should deport 15 million people. And I'm like, what if that necessitates violence on the streets? They're like, of course it would necessitate violence. Get them out. And it's like just like a nice someone who otherwise would like give me the gloves off their hands, like I was saying earlier, which I know that it sucks that I keep trying to like paint them as nice people, but I'm just saying the nice people have been corrupted by Donald Trump's constant
it's not their fault.
rhetoric.
Not their fault at all. And that is something that doesn't get enough traction. The fact that these people are victims, effectively.
People get mad when I say it too, yeah.
Yeah, but it's, I think it's important to stand up for people. And I suppose the difference between Republicans and Democrats in this context is that if you're a Republican and you see the light and you decide that you want to go into the more progressive Democrat liberal thinking kind of fold, you will be welcomed with open arms. Mm-hmm. But Republicans don't want snowflake Democrats showing up at all. They've lost all sense of humanity over this subject, this polarized culture.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. And of course, they're the ones who have ratcheted up the tensions, like I was saying earlier. I mean, Donald Trump Jr. posted that meme about Nancy Pelosi or Paul Pelosi only a few months after he was in the hospital, after his head got bashed in with a hammer. And then they have the gall to say that Democrats are the ones who have gotten us to where we are today, or that Democrats are the ones that tried to take Trump out, when that's not even true whatsoever. They always vaguely say they tried to do it. They brought us to this point. When, Donald Trump's entire entry into politics was saying that Barack Obama wasn't born in America. So like you say, the standards aren't there for Republicans anymore. They've lost all humanity, it feels like. And then they try to flip the script and gaslight us, which is the worst part at the end of the day.
So who is they in their minds? Because, I mean, I've heard this too. where they'll try and blame everything on this they. Does that connect with Trump's creation of this fake deep state?
Yep.
That is ultimately he's talking about the federal government workers, people that have devoted their lives to public service no matter who is in office. That's really who he's gaslighting.
Yeah, he's talking about the deep state. And then when I go to these MAGA rallies and I ask them, like, oh, you'd rather vote for Putin than Kamala? They're like, yep. And I'm like, why do you think that people don't like Putin? They're like, the deep state doesn't want you to like Putin. The deep state is just the establishment. And I do want to say that that's Donald Trump. It's a sign of authoritarianism. Donald Trump undermining the existing institutions so that if he gets back into office, he can tear them down with ease. When he convinces a large portion of the American population, like we don't know the exact number, like you said earlier, but if you poll Americans, like 30% of them think the election was stolen. So let's say he's convinced a third of the people in America that none of the institutions are working. They're all against them. And then that justifies him if he does want to enact Project 2025, or more specifically, this Schedule F executive order that he enacted in his first term. And the Schedule F executive order says that he can hire and fire civil servants at will, not based on their merit, but based on how loyal they are. So then Trump can stuff our institutions full of all of these different loyalists. There won't be any Mike Pences or Bill Barrs or Mark Meadows to keep him in check. It'll be Rudy Giuliani and Mike Lindell, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, to go back to your point broadly, that is what we're seeing here, I think.
Can you believe that we're holding up people like Mike Pence and Bill Barr as kind of bastions of decency when these two are both far-right Christian nationalists? Mike Pence with his weird relationship with women and slightly too perfect hair. He was once called the whitest man in America. And Bill Barr, who rewrote the Mueller report, paraphrased it before it was released to get Donald Trump off the hook. I mean, these are terrible people to have as leaders, and yet they are the last remaining guardrails that we have against authoritarianism.
And yeah, Bill Barr is spineless because he did re-endorse Trump. But I will say he's a very good talking point when I'm at these MAGA rallies, because I'm like, do you trust Bill Barr, who is Donald Trump's sword and shield, who Donald Trump handpicked? And they say, yeah, Trump picks the best people. And I'm like, even Bill Barr said there was no election fraud, no evidence of election fraud. And I think that's because, I mean, the people around Trump were trying to keep him in check over and over. Mike Pence was trying to keep him in check. Even Ivanka was trying to keep him in check, and he was the one going off the rails. So it really does demonstrate that, yeah, Bill Barr is not a good person, but he still doesn't want to tank our entire country and what's existed since the inception of America. Like, Mike Pence definitely probably hates women and wants women to know their place, but he doesn't want America to blow up.
Some say he prefers men. Maybe that's the problem.
Definitely. The way he says mother.
Did you see that time he got on that tractor with that guy and started slapping him on the chest?
I did see that. Yeah, I did see that. It
was very romantic. Okay, let's talk about, because you mentioned 30%, but 30% is 30% of voters. It's not 30% of Americans, is it? Because only 67% of Americans voted in the last election. So we have this disparity in data, don't we, where we refer to America as a certain demographic, but actually the only data we really have to go on when it comes to this is the vote, and the vote is only really 2/3 of Americans. So I'm trying to kind of I'm just trying to make this good, because I'm worried that people think that there are more Trump supporters than there actually are. And I don't believe there are. I actually think that he is a fringe candidate, a minority candidate who makes an awful lot of noise. And it's a little bit like in the emergency room. If you talk to doctors, like, who do you want to worry about in the emergency room? It's the quiet ones. They're the ones that actually need the most attention because they're really sick. The ones who are screaming and shouting, yeah, let's not worry about them. And this is true of politics too, isn't it?
Yeah, you do bring up a good point when it comes to the disparity in numbers, and it also depends on your definition of Trump supporter, because I wouldn't define Trump supporter as the 71 million people who voted for him.
Right.
And what does that make up? About like 25% of Americans, right? But then out of those 71 million people, I bet like 40 million of them only actually believe that the election was stolen, which that's still a really good chunk. But then when you're talking about 40 million Americans, that's only 10% of Americans. So you do raise a good point that we don't exactly know. I bet you there's a more I bet you there's a study that clarifies it more, but
well, there's the census, of course, and you know, that gives us a little bit of better data, but also people are often dishonest. This is why Republicans don't understand why there are more trans people in society now. It's like, well, because they were too frickin' scared to fill out the form that they were trans in the census last time around. Because society hopefully is becoming more open and more equal, and that to be LGBTQ plus is to hopefully, you know, you come of age. You come out and you be proud, and that wasn't possible in 1972 as it is now in 2024. And they don't seem to understand that society needs to change in the correct direction. They would rather roll it back to the 1950s.
Yeah, and on the other side of that, maybe we do overestimate how many Trump supporters there are, because I do remember my first viral clip was a Trump supporter telling me that like 25% of the American population was transgender. That means 1 in 4 people he's walking past would be transgender. That's actually like a pro-trans argument, because if you think about it, that means that trans people pass so well that 25% can be just walking around and you don't notice. But yeah, maybe there is this phenomenon where we overestimate how large and nefarious the other side is. And yeah, that is a good point about the census.
Just conversely, if Donald Trump is making an awful lot of noise, remember, he hasn't won anything, Adam, since 2016.
Yep.
And people forget that. And the candidates that he backed in the midterms, they did not do well. So he is a loser by definition.
Yeah.
But the Democrats, they don't make so much noise. There is this kind of relaxed confidence that they think that people can understand the difference between right and wrong and good and bad, and that we have a kind of inbuilt understanding that the Democrats are the goodies and the Republicans are the baddies in this election because of the threat of authoritarianism and dictatorship. Would you prefer for the Democrats to make more noise, make as much noise as Donald Trump, to give as good as they get?
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be in the same way. We don't have to go out there and relentlessly lie. But I think a really good example of doing this is like Mark Cuban went on Theo Vaughn's podcast.
Right.
Mark Cuban went on a bunch of podcasts. And some of my friends from high school who have conservative families who are predisposed to being Republicans were like sending me clips of Mark Cuban. They were like, this is some good stuff. Did you know that Trump scammed people in the 90s? I was like, yeah, I've been trying to tell you this stuff, but hearing it from Mark Cuban is really important. Having Tim Walz go out there, having Democratic interlocutors go out there and make noise in the media and do it in bombastic ways. Don't be afraid to be a little bit edgy. My friends and I always talk about like educational edginess. It feels like Democrats lost all of their edge for a while. They want to play it very safe and squeaky clean. No, you can get out there and you can wrestle a bit. Of course, don't lie. Don't be demeaning or don't be a bully. But like, yeah, I mean, if somebody like Rudy Giuliani wants to undermine our democracy, we can bully Rudy Giuliani. Who cares?
Because Kamala Harris doesn't do that. She does play a very safe line, doesn't she? Mm-hmm. And she's not really like that, I sense, in real life. You know, in order to get those jobs that you described, the district attorney role and the senator role, as a black woman in a sea of white men, she has had to work so hard. You know, she had all sorts of problems years ago with the police in San Francisco. She had to overcome that and get them on side. She is really a very special candidate, and yet it's so hard, isn't it? Because television is so difficult. You know, the interviews that she does, invariably she plays it safe, and that does not work out for her. She's actually, in my opinion, a far better candidate than she presents. So how do we help her with that?
You know what a really good example is, as you were saying it is? I think she was on Oprah when she said this. Yeah, she was on Oprah where she goes, you know, I probably shouldn't say this. I'll probably get in trouble, but I have a gun, or I would shoot someone if they broke into my house. Yeah. She says something to that effect.
Yeah.
And I think everything about that is perfect, because Trump even uses that line all the time. Trump always says, you know, I probably shouldn't say this. I probably shouldn't be saying this.
Yeah.
And that sort of primes it to be a headline.
Yeah.
Trump says something he shouldn't say. And then Kamala said something that was so fundamentally American, but it was also a little bit edgy, right? Like saying like, yeah, I would shoot someone if they went into my house. That's so perfectly edgy. and it grabbed headlines. I think she needs to do more stuff like that, like be unapologetically American and liberal, reclaim that stuff. I like how Tim Walz is always like, yeah, I have guns. He can say like, yeah, I go trap shooting, I go hunting. I don't really like, I'm a normal American guy. I just want you to stay the hell out of my bedroom, my doctor's office.
Mind your business, as he said.
Yeah, it's all really good branding, but they just need to be more fierce with it, more open with it. And I don't want to use the whole right-wing talking point, but there was a while there where I did want them to do more interviews. And Kamala is finally doing the interview circuit this week. But about a month ago, they were playing it very safe, not doing too many. And I was trying to tell my audience this, and they kept going, Adam, you're using the right-wing talking point. But I was like, no, Tim Walz on Theo Vaughn would do amazing numbers. Kamala Harris on like Hot Ones. It doesn't have to be Hot Ones, but something like that. The Call Her Daddy podcast. Yeah. Perfect example. And
well, because she's cool. She is actually a cool candidate in the same way that Obama was cool.
Yep.
And it's difficult to find politicians who are cool. So many of them do not sit in that space, but she has it. We have to take another break, but I want to come back and finally talk about the plan for the next 3 weeks, because there's a lot of work to do. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Alo or Allbirds or Skims, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. And the not-so-secret secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions by up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going... So, if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/weekend, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/weekend to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/weekend. We're back on The Weekend Show with Adam Mockler. Adam, you've seen huge success with your YouTube channel, and people really respond to you. There is a shortage of a kind of, Gen Z connecting with the traditional voters who invariably are older. And, we've always seen this. Do you think there is going to be a shift this time? Because, there's a lot of people now who have come of age and they're getting to vote for the first time. Do you think that, you mentioned earlier that you feel that people are, younger people, they understand about the threat of climate change and similar. But do you feel that they understand how serious this election is and that they actually have a role to play that will, where humanity is at stake?
Yeah, it's rough because, of course, like any generation, we're not a monolith. So I'd say if you look at the polling, overwhelmingly, we're liberal. 70%, 80% of young people, let's say like 75%, believe in climate change. They believe in marriage equality. They believe in all of these core liberal tenets. But a lot of them, for one reason or another, still will vote red because their parents vote red. Still vote red because they see Trump walking to UFC, pumping his fist, and they think it's badass. Or they're going to vote for him because they just think he upholds this masculine, macho figure. So I do think that we are going to overwhelmingly vote blue. Absolutely. There's no question about that. If you look at the last election, we turned out and voted blue. But I do think people are going to be surprised that young men will vote red a little bit more than previously thought. And I do think that is because of the dominance of this male podcast sphere. So if you can picture like a Theo Vaughn, a Joe Rogan, even like the Andrew Tate type have sucked up all of these young men into thinking that being right-wing is macho and masculine. And this comes back to our last question. Democrats need to start infiltrating these podcast circuits. Again, having Tim Walz on Theo Vaughn, having Mark Cuban on Theo Vaughn to show young men, to create this permission structure that it's okay to be a liberal young man. It's actually cool and masculine to be embracing these sorts of ideas. I think that's really important. So to answer your question, yes, we will be voting blue overwhelmingly, but a lot of young men probably will vote Trump, unfortunately. And I don't think Gen Z is going to absolutely sway the election one way or another. I will say in 2020, we did vote uniquely, a unique amount compared to previous young generations. So if you look at 2000, I'm pretty sure young people voted at a very low rate. Young people were not a reliable voter base. But in 2024, Gen Z voted like double the amount that young voters did in 2000. So we do turn out. We do kick ass. But yeah.
Barack Obama is now out on the campaign trail.
Yep.
In these final few weeks, he's really going to hit it hard. He made a speech on Thursday night that was very powerful, and he talked about exactly this, about this machismo thing, and how that it's not what you think it is, and that to be a real man is to respect women and to understand women and know that women are perfectly capable. And this isn't messaging that we've really heard before. Maybe it's not been necessary, I don't know, but it's certainly necessary for American society. And with me coming from Europe, where we had our first female prime minister in 1979, and we've had two since, so many of the great leaders of Europe have been female, and Angela Merkel is a perfect example of that in Germany. We have moved on, and I often think that America does have a very isolationist view of the world, but it's really missing out, isn't it? Because things like climate change, I mean, if you were to look to nations like Denmark, for example, they are doing more on climate change than anywhere else on the planet. And yet here it's still a dirty word. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, I can't wait, man. If VP Harris wins, I'm going to love it. Not only because of the MAGA meltdown of seeing a black woman in the position of the presidency beat Donald Trump. Not only that, of course, that's going to be so much fun to watch. It's going to piss them off so much. But also just the progress that liberalism will be able to make over the next 4 years. Not only symbolically, but the actual changes, hopefully, when it comes to climate change, when it comes to, Donald Trump pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accord. First thing when he got into office. Imagine what he'd do with the second term when he has a better understanding of what's around him, or when he has smarter people around him. So I just think having VP Harris there would be incredibly nice. Not only to have the first woman president symbolically, but because liberalism is great, and it'll be a beacon. It'll return America into this beacon of liberalism, where right now it's this mosh posh of like half MAGA, not half, sorry, 1/3, 10% MAGA fascism,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, from the outside looking in, people oftentimes think MAGA is a super loud, like half of America are Trump supporter, blah, blah, blah. And I think it'll be nice to have Kamala Harris restoring some faith in America on the global stage. And I love Biden too, but I mean, yeah, objectively, he's pretty old. I don't know if right now he's like the beacon of liberalism, strong liberalism that we want.
Well, yeah, he's done his work. I mean, he got us this far. And he also prevented Trump from winning in 2020, which was very helpful. But I would like to just pick up on something you said about liberalism being... You kind of described it as being something special. And I would like to think of liberalism as being normal.
The baseline.
Yeah, because that's my experience from Europe, is that to be liberal-minded is normality. So abortion, as a perfect example, is normal. It's completely normal. It's not like super special to give women the choice as to what to do with their own body. That shouldn't be like magic. It's just normal. In the same way that to be gay is normal, or to be trans is normal. And yet, here in the US, these things have politically been turned into hot-button issues. And I find that very frustrating.
Yeah, unfortunately, Trump and MAGA have pushed the Overton window so far to the right that we actually have to champion liberalism now, like a return to the normalcy, return to the baseline, which we were doing pretty well under the Obama administration. I guess we had this this simmering movement of MAGA and the Tea Party at that time. But Yeah, it seems like we're going to have some championing of liberalism to do, and I think it's broadly a good thing to be outspoken about what liberalism is, because I have so many friends, I've touched on this like 4 times throughout this podcast, but I have so many friends where if you say the word liberal, they cringe and they say, I'm not a blue-haired college student, I'm not a liberal, but then you say, oh, do you think marriage equality is fine? Yeah, of course. Do you think the government should promote individual freedom, stay out of the doctor's office? Yeah, of course. Do you think that climate change should be eased? Yeah, of course. So it's like, okay, you agree with all these fundamental ideas.
So maybe it's the word. Maybe that's the problem, is that it's the branding. So
the branding.
Change it to normal as opposed to liberal. Do you see how it changes the argument?
That is true, yeah. Like, I already made this point too, but again, protecting our ally abroad should be intuitive, common sense, but people have gotten it so twisted and illiberal that you kind of have to like revert them back to this liberal view that yes, let's protect our ally abroad and help our economy in the process. It's the wrapping. You got to wrap it in conservative rhetoric.
It's so interesting, isn't it? And this goes back to the marketing and the branding that we talked about at the beginning. Whereas Trump has successfully, he really has very successfully created a movement from nothing. I refer to them as turkeys voting for Thanksgiving. Because there was no tax cut for working people under him. There was nothing. There was that kind of fake $1,000 rebate that people got early in the presidency with his signature. And that was like an emotional blackmail bribe. But there was nothing for these people. He didn't reopen factories. He didn't give them anything. And yet by then they were so far suckered in that they were on the Trump train. So when he talks about Trump derangement syndrome, and this is his language that he uses to describe people like you and I who are obsessed with Donald Trump, again, flipping the narrative, how do you think that plays out? Because this whole projection thing, turning the story around, this is a theme with Donald Trump, and it has muddied the communication lines.
How do I feel about Trump derangement syndrome? Like how he uses that tactic?
Yeah.
I'd say broadly, I think it's a really clever way of undermining any real concerns. You could really easily sweep it away as Trump derangement syndrome, when in reality, I'd like to introduce Trump derangement syndrome Trump derangement syndrome. There's some reverse form of it where you can easily sweep away any valid criticism as real Trump derangement, or like TDS, right?
Yeah.
When you can say that this dude undermined our institutions, you can play the Raffensperger phone call, and even if they listen to it, they don't believe what they're hearing.
Yeah.
That is the real TDS, right? I think that Donald Trump has it goes back to his branding. It's a clever way of trying to undermine any real concerns, in the same way that Make America Great Again is a clever way to appeal to some vague idea of like a racist past, when in reality, we're not too deranged.
The country is so big. I actually think they might need to rethink the United States branding, because the states are anything but united at the moment. So let's just refer to it as the states. Because of your experience where you are and going to Trump rallies, that is why when we first started talking, you were like, oh, I think that he's really popular, and I'm trying to kind of bring you around and be like, actually, it's a much smaller number of people.
Can I just say, in my defense, I went to 2 Trump rallies last weekend on Saturday and Sunday. The first one was in Butler. The second one was in PA. And that MAGA brain rot must have gotten to me, because when I got home, I was so crushed. I was like, how did I just walk past 30,000 people who support Trump?
Well, you have TDDS. That's what it is.
Yes.
But that's okay. That's okay. But with the America being so big, North America being so big, it's very hard to get a sense of how the country is going to vote. You see, in England, it's quite easy because the country is so small. So you have a kind of national conversation, and you kind of understand how the country feels. But America is too big for that, and the states are too divided for that. So I'm just trying to preempt the vote in a way and give people a sense that actually, we live in our little bubbles and kind of information silos. You make the effort to go out into that kind of Trump world, and so you cross the Rubicon of that, the social space. Do you feel that from where people are sitting at home versus the people who are actually out and engaged, because there's 2 different types of voters, right? There's those people who will actually drag themselves to a rally, and there are those that'll just keyboard warrior at home. Do you think that people understand that kind of the dimensions of this? Because I really do think that there is a very large anti-Trump movement that is not really getting the airtime.
I will say that what you see online is, yes, vastly different than what you see in person. Even like the pro-Palestine movement, I think, is a lot of times a lot louder online, or at least like the extreme wings of that movement are louder online. And then if you go to a pro-Palestine movement, everyone there will be nice and chill. The same thing with the right. I mean, the loudest Trump supporters online, the most violent ones get boosted. But I'm going to go back to what I say. When I show up to a rally and I talk to these people in person and look them face to face, they are the nicest people ever. So I do think online, it can definitely give you a warped view of how reality is. And I think I've kind of fallen into that over the past few weeks. I keep overstating how many Trump supporters there are just due to how much Trump stuff I'm interacting with day to day constantly. But yeah, I do think it's a little bit of an illusion online where the loudest voices doesn't oftentimes reflect reality. And that's what I say to Trump supporters at the rallies. So I have different techniques that I use to disarm them while I'm kind of pushing back. So sometimes I'll go up to them and I'll say, hey, would you like to talk about Donald Trump? And they say, yeah. And I'm like, I'm going to push back a little bit throughout this interview, but that's because I think it's important that we create dialogue. And then by the end of the interview, when they realize, oh, you're a liberal, like pushing back, sometimes they'll be like, you're libbed up. But sometimes when they say that, I'll say something to the effect of, hey, whenever you go online or on Twitter, it seems like you and I should hate each other or be at each other's necks or fighting, but we just had a really good conversation where we were able to reach a middle ground. So I think, yeah, broadly speaking, there's a very big difference between how people interact in real life and how people interact online and how everything reflects, yeah. And
it's also so nice to have a political discourse where you bring something to the table and people leave with maybe a slightly different opinion. And the joy of that is actually lost online. There's very few places you can go to on the internet where there is that kind of volley of ideas. And that's something that really is exclusive to these types of meetings or to the, used to be called the town square or the water cooler or any of these cliches.
It's so satisfying, and I think even in a post-Trump era, I want to spend a lot of my time focusing on content where I talk to people in a normal way. I think that it's very important. It's honestly what I enjoy doing more than anything right now. Like whenever I go to the DNC, which I live stream for a few days, or whenever I go to one of these MAGA rallies, I went to like Vivek Ramaswamy events just to like talk to people. I always get energy from discussing issues with people that disagree with me. And I think that in like 5 years, even if Trump is gone and out of American politics, you'll still be seeing content, hopefully, where I'm interacting with people, hopefully with better quality cameras, better quality setup and stuff.
Well, I'm thrilled that you do the work, because that's really the key to this, isn't it? And I'm very grateful that you also challenge people in the way that you do, in a kind of non-aggressive, kind of educational way. It's essential. And I think that a lot of people will come back from the brink. Once Trump has gone, I have faith that people will return to a kind of more normal state rather than this kind of heightened weirdness that we're all having to grapple with.
Yeah, I hope so too. I think that it'll take time, but I think that it is possible, especially as hopefully the information landscape begins to heal. Right now, once Twitter gets nuked out of existence, we'll be fine. But yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, good luck with everything. We'll speak again after the election and remind people to vote, as I'm sure you do. Adam Mockler, for now, thanks for joining the Weekend Show.
I really enjoyed chatting with you. Yeah, have a great Sunday night.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. You can see more from me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. And I'll be back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.